Welcome back, David Curry.
Thank you. This idea of religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time, some mark the beginning of that idea with the passage of the International Religious Freedom Act in 1998. And we're going to discuss that today, where we've come from, where we're headed, and we have three amazing panelists with us today. I would like to introduce Imam Magid, who is the Executive Imam of the Al Dulles Area Muslim Society. Would you welcome Imam Magid, please? Our next panelist is Rabbi David Saperstein, the Director Emeritus of the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism and also the former Ambassador Large for Religious Freedom. Would you welcome Rabbi Saperstein? And of course, Dr. Tom Farr is the President and co-founder of the Religious Freedom Institute. Dr. Farr. Wonderful. Well, we're going to have a conversation with three really smart people who know a lot of stuff, probably more than I do, certainly. But what I'd like to do is maybe allow you each to have 3 or 4 minutes as an opening statement, and then we'll go from there and ask questions. Tom, could I ask you to please begin?
Thank you, David.
We're doing it from our seats, David? From our seats?
I want briefly to highlight 3 founding moments of what Secretary Pompeo this morning correctly called this lovely, God-driven international religious freedom movement. My first founding moment was the passage of the 1998 International Religious Freedom Act. No surprise there. Its founders and thought leaders are my heroes, every one of them. I can't name them all, but I do want to mention a few who fashioned the IRFA and implemented it in its early years. Congressman Frank Wolf and Chris Smith, a senator named Sam Brownback, Ambassador David Saperstein, who is nearby, who way back in 1998, you may not know, also served as the first chairman of the IRF Commission. I want to mention 2 men with whom I served in the State Department in those early years, the first and second IRF ambassadors, Bob Seipel and John Hanford. Many thought leaders shaped the law and U.S. policy in the early days, such as Cole Durham, Nina Shea, Katrina Lantos Sweat, Paul Marshall, Mary Ann Glendon. Thought leaders outside the U.S. were key to the new movement as well, such as England's Lord David Alton and Mervyn Thomas, founder of Christian Solidarity Worldwide. Each of these people have personally witnessed the devastating effects of religious persecution on human beings, on families, and on entire societies. Each has dedicated much, if not all, of his or her life to advancing religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. The second founding moment that I want to mention was the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That profoundly important declaration internationalized the powerful idea that some human rights, including the right of religious freedom, are inalienable. A major drafter of that declaration was the great Lebanese philosopher Charles Malik. His son, Habib, is here with us today. The third founding moment was the 1776 Declaration of Independence, an American Declaration of Independence, in which our founders declared to the world, and I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that each is endowed by his Creator with unalienable or inalienable rights," unquote. The summit charter, which is, by the way, out in the Carter, if you'd like to read it and sign it, you're welcome to, reflects 2 core principles from the American Declaration of Independence that are critically important for this 21st century God-driven international movement. The first is that religious freedom is about religion and the right to be religious. It protects, of course, the right to reject religion, but that's not its intrinsic purpose. Religious freedom protects the right of everyone to believe in religious truths, or not. But if one does believe, the right to join with others of like mind and spirit in a religious community, and the right equally and within due limits to exercise their religion in order to shape the culture and the laws and the policies of their respective nations. The second principle from the American Declaration is that no human being of whatever opinion, status, or location can live a fully human life without religious freedom. That is precisely why religious freedom is properly understood as inalienable. It's not the gift of any government. It's the gift of God. The role of any just government is to protect this inalienable right for all of its citizens and all its religious communities, especially its minority religious communities. On the other hand, if there are no inalienable rights, if all rights are equal, then our rights are simply what those with power say they are. That is precisely the approach taken by totalitarian governments throughout history, including the Chinese Communist government today. So to sum up, religious freedom is the freedom of every human being to be religious, and it's a right given by God to each one of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very good, Tom.
Ambassador?
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here with David Curry, my dear friends and distinguished colleagues, Tom Farr and Imam Magid, champions of religious freedom all. We were asked to set the IRF enterprise in context. I agree with almost every word that Tom just said. I'll come to one slight difference.
I feel much better.
Here, but setting it in context is different than my normal talks, focusing on the persecuted and the oppressed. I have 4 points I would have liked to have made, but time for only 2. So here they go. The first involves a paradox. We are here because our cause involves advocacy for the millions and millions of the oppressed and persecuted. Yet, in viewing IRF in a broader context, as we look at the sweep of the post-World War II history and at the ebb and flow of human rights and religious freedom, and look at where the midpoint has gone, Freedom House, who has been measuring such trends since the end of World War II, points out that the midpoint of the ebb and flow of human rights and religious freedom worldwide showed an expansion through 2006, obviously energized by the collapse of the Soviet Union, and has been retrenching since 2006, spurred by the recent expansion of authoritarian regimes. The question for us is whether the cooperative endeavors of democratic governments, civil society, religious, legal, human rights organizations, all working together pushing religious freedom and human rights, achieve much good and prevented things from being much worse. I truly believe that with the defeat of the Axis, the winding down of colonialism, the collapse of the Soviet Empire, that the post-World War II gains far outreach the losses. We all focus rightfully on the Pew finding that with the alarming and deteriorating state of religious freedoms within so many of the world's most populous nations, 80% of the world's population lives in countries with severe restrictions on religious freedoms, too often up to the level of crimes against humanity. But we ignore the Pew finding that 3/4 of the world's countries have no serious restrictions, and most religion flourishes. As terrible as things are in too many places in which our efforts are rightfully focused, the work that democratic governments with the civil society and religious communities have done in the past 75 years have made things far better across the globe than they otherwise would have been. In other words, your work makes a difference, and your work will be absolutely indispensable in making a difference for good in the coming decades. The second point addresses the relationship that we have heard several times today between IRF and human rights. Here, it is true that if there are no unalienable rights, then rights are just positive rights, whatever decided. But the fact that there may be more than one unalienable right is also true. And at the core of our human rights agenda is a series of rights that we regard in our American context as unalienable rights. Here. So this often takes the expression of should there be separate religious freedom officers and ambassadors, or should the office and staff come under the human rights sections of the American government or foreign ministries as it does in many countries across the globe. So let me be clear, as Tony Blinken and Samantha Powers and Melissa Rogers and others have argued, because I think this is true across the political spectrum, you cannot have freedom of the pulpit, freedom to worship, freedom to proselytize if you do not have freedom of speech. You cannot print Bibles and prayer books and educational materials and bulletins, have websites, prayer books, have websites, religious TV shows, newspapers, and social media accounts without freedom of the press, freedom of speech, freedom of association. And conversely, you cannot have those other human rights if there is no freedom of religion or freedom of conscience. Human rights in general, the core unalienable rights, and religious freedom are interwoven and reinforcing. While I acknowledge differing motives when IRFA was passed, in the main, when we established that separate office and ambassadorship and USERF, the consensus was that it was urgently needed because religious freedom was simply not given its due as a foundational human right. It was an ignored stepchild in the human rights world. 23 years later, just look around at this summit. What we did worked. And so my abiding personal thanks, and I suspect your thanks as well, to Frank Wolf and his colleagues for driving the IRF process, to Sam Brownback's vision and leadership, and the tireless IRF office headed still by the gifted Dan Nadell in creating the ministerials and the alliance. Our thanks to you, USERF, in Canada and the Obama IRF office I was a part of, with a shout out to the remarkable Knox teams for the contact group and the parliamentary coalition. The question now in the U.S. isn't whether we should merge those offices structurally. Politically in the United States, that won't and should not happen. The question rather is how to coordinate more functionally and effectively religious freedom and broader human rights. I want every human rights office to own, and every ambassador to own the religious freedom agenda as part of their work for human rights. And I want the religious freedom officers to be comfortable in weaving together religious freedom within a human rights context. Most particularly, we will never secure religious freedom until we have ensured that the broader legal and human rights principle that no citizen's rights in any country should ever depend on their religious identity, beliefs, or peaceful practices becomes the reality in every nation on earth. They are one and the same in terms of reinforcing each other. I'm proud of the model that America offers on that, and it is vitally needed in the coming decades.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Imam Magid.
It's very tough to follow.
Indeed.
David Saperstein. First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Brownback and the great team for putting this together. Really, it's very important for all of us to continue this effort, and I'm quite sure some of you have come from far away to be part of this conference so we can advance religious freedom around the globe. This day is considered one of the holidays for Muslims. It's the month of pilgrimage, especially these 10 days. And it reminds me of the story of Abraham, Prophet Abraham, who left Iraq, according to Islamic teaching. I'm quite sure some theologian is going to debate with me the history. But according to Islamic history, he left Iraq because of persecutions and went from Iraq to Egypt, from Egypt to Mecca, and from Mecca to Jerusalem. Abraham was a global citizen. looking for religious freedom. And I remember that group of us went to Vatican to sit together around Abrahamic initiative to see how can we advance religious freedom using theology of inclusive, teaching of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and could be Hinduism, Buddhism, for all religion. How can we create theology that protect, promote, advance religious freedom in our communities? You know, it is very important for me to see that the group of representatives of community being persecuted in this conference, David and I and Dr. Kent from Dr. Farr organization, we went to the Rohingya, and we have seen what happened to those people. When you hear about people being persecuted in the news, you hear about numbers. This is how many people being persecuted, how many people being killed, how many churches, mosques, or synagogues being burned. But until and unless you see the people faces and you realize what they went through, it will not be the same reading it in the newspaper. That's why I'm so happy to see that people who stood here and spoke to you about what they went through. There's a verse in the Holy Quran that says, no compulsion religion. We have held our own community accountable to this. With the initiative of Marrakesh Declaration, with Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya, we had 240 Muslim scholars, Shia and Sunni, to sign that declaration. And you can see a copy of it at Adams Center booth, where we made a commitment to protect religious minority or citizens of other religion living in majority Muslim countries. This is a matter of principle. And I think every faith community have to hold their own people accountable and to create their own covenant of protecting religious minority or people of other faith in majority faith, whatever Christianity, Islam, Judaism, because there is no religion is a majority always. With the global village, we might be a minority in one place, but a majority in another place. And we have to promote and protect the rights of people of other faith as we promote and advocate for our own faith. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. In the few minutes we have, I want to try to get as many questions in as I can to kind of set this law in context as what it's done around the world, maybe some unfulfilled potential thus far, and maybe even some cultural things. Dr. Farr, I'm going to start with a question to you. What can we do now that, as a government, as a people, with this law that we couldn't have done in 1997? I mean, what powers did it give you that give our government that you think is significant?
Well, I'm going to have to agree with my friend David Saperstein, and that does happen between us every now and then. In fact, I can remember something that he said very early, probably in 99 or 2000, that, we've got Foreign Service officers for the first time. I don't know if you remember this. Junior Foreign Service officers who are writing this religious freedom report for the first time. It's been done now for 22, 23 years. Then we didn't have a religious freedom report. We had a human rights report, but it didn't focus on this. So from that very modest beginning and the expectation that it would grow, I agree with him that this has taken legs that are beyond encouraging to somebody who's been laboring in the vineyards as we have for so long. Just to see the people in this audience, the Americans that are in this audience, who have not until now hopefully been invested in this issue. Part of the purpose of this summit is to allow Americans who may not be aware of what's going on around there to see how precious this right is for everyone throughout the world. So the answer to your question, David, is that although we could not have foreseen what has happened, I honestly believe that what David says is correct, that while the stories are terrible, I wept this morning. I'm sure some of you did at some of the things that I heard. And yet there is such hope because of this Building International Alliance, because of the awakening awareness of all of the American people of the importance of this. And I would add my deep gratitude for the administration, at least two of their spokespeople saying today that they will have an ambassador at large nominated within the next few weeks. I think that is terrific.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you very much. Ambassador, in your time in office and before and after, I mean, how have you seen the efficacy of this law take place? Are there challenges to it or limits to it that you might tweak over time? I mean, you've seen it firsthand.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start where Tom left off. We've had 23 years of that report, which means thousands of Foreign Service officers have had to deal with it, and it's been reviewed by the head of the political section and the ambassador and the desk officer in the State Department and the regional desk in the State Department before going up to the secretary. The system is really putting into effect here. And that report gets used by many countries around the world as kind of a blueprint for their Foreign Service officers because they don't produce their own report. And it becomes invaluable. And I heard over and over again from people, particularly the smallest groups, the ones that feel so isolated, saying, we didn't know anyone knew about us. You've taken our story and you've lifted it up for the world. Our lawyers take your report as the first document they submit to show that our treatment violates international law. Here, before Madeleine Albright, we had many great secretaries of state. Almost none of them ever talked about religious freedom. Today, what you heard from Secretary Pompeo, what you heard from Secretary Blinken, it's inconceivable that it wouldn't be a mainstay of discussion in general about where we are. You helped make that happen here. The real challenge for us, David, is how do we get more teeth into it? Sanctions can be helpful in certain situations, particularly where there are proto-democratic, quasi-democratic institutions to build on. Think about the impact of sanctions on South Africa with its labor unions, its outspoken religious community, its relatively free newspapers. But where there is absent those, it is very hard that sanctions actually are going to have a short-term impact. It may over a long period of time have it. What are the other tools that we need? I think we all agree that that's the area we have to really focus on more. And I would also ask for more data about actually evaluating what works and doesn't work and the analysis of why. There's not the rigor that we really need for that. So you talk about tweaking it. Those are the things I would focus on.
Great. Do you want to address that question?
Yes, I would like us to talk about the role of the civil society.
Please.
I do believe that government has a role to play in pressuring other government, but I do believe the civil society really have a big role to play in really addressing the issue of religious freedom in grassroots level. I'm so glad that Sudan is off the list, and I do believe that civil society in Sudanese community in Sudan have played a role in addressing this issue. And I'm so glad that, Ambassador David Saperstein visit to Sudan have played a role in that. I was with him in that visit, and he met with civil society in Sudan. We met with the Christian community and religious community. And therefore, I do believe that people who are here from the civil society, they have a big role to play in helping advancing the law on the ground.
Yeah. And Imam Magid, Mohammed El Sanusi, a whole range of civil society people played a very important role in the changes that happened or preparing the groundwork for changes that came about in Sudan.
Yeah, the limits of the law, you know, sort of that boundary is where culture and our other environments pick up. And one of the things that we have to be honest about in this room is that if there's hesitancy for Christians to speak out on behalf of Muslims who are being persecuted, or for Hindus to speak out on behalf of Christians. I mean, if we have these internecine sort of restrictions, that it hurts us. What can we do as a family here of brothers and sisters under God to improve the cultural understanding of how we can support each other so that we're speaking out for each other, everybody encouraging each other on this religious freedom? How do you see that as maybe being a way we can improve?
Bob Roberts, myself, and David, we started this organization, a multi-faith neighborhood network, which is meant to have people of faith to stand for each other, especially in community where we believe there's persecution, discriminations. And I just want to say that there's also aspect of racism mixed with religious freedom. I just want to say that. Like you have in some places not only been persecuted as Muslim or as Christian, but because also ethnic minorities. Sure. And therefore, the issue of religious freedom has to be connected to the issue of diversity, creating an inclusive community. I would like to say that people also have really impacted by this the most are women and young people. And I do believe that in our approach to religious freedom, we should not overlook that the role of women, and in this panel, all of us men, I'm sorry about that, but the role of women in advancing religious freedom and being subject also to persecutions. And I do believe that we have to create an environment by which that none of us, whether Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, will accept and allow women to be excluded from this, intellectual, religious discourse about religious freedom.
Amen. Yeah, that's worthy.
Thank you, Imam.
So, some final thoughts. Dr. Farr, what are you optimistic about?
Oh, well, I'm a Christian. I'm optimistic because I believe the victory's been won. That's the first thing said. But that very optimism leads me to want religious freedom for every human being, because I believe my Lord and Savior wants me to do that. It wants me to treat all the people God created as seekers of truth. Jesus didn't coerce anybody. He drew people to him. We need to think in those terms as Christians. And I would ask each of you to think about your faith, whether you're Christian or Muslim or Jewish or whatever your faith is, draw from it to defend those who are not of your faith. It's there. Find it and defend your brothers and sisters who are seeking the truth just as you are.
Thank you. Ambassador?
Yeah, I would just build on the last two things that we heard. Here, there's nothing wrong with having a group that's primarily focused on your own faith community and the desperate needs we have. There are Christians being persecuted all across the globe, and there are organizations that do extraordinary work, David, here that have a particular focus on that. So long as we all recognize that in any country where any group can be subject to persecution and oppression and ethnic cleansing, no group ultimately be safe. Mm-hmm. We really are in this together. And when I see us get together like this, how can you not be optimistic This is exactly what we need. Our friend Chris Seipel talks about we really have to be intentional about religious literacy, learning about other religions, not trying necessarily to convert each other every time we're together, but learn about each other with an understanding what he calls covenantal pluralism, of a respect for other traditions as well. That has to be the foundation we have. But when I look across the globe in my travels, I've been to over 80 countries, and 35 of them in the time I was at the State Department. Here, everywhere I see interfaith coalitions where 40 years ago they just didn't exist. It's been done with intentionality by our government that's really trained people on how to do that work very quietly, often behind the scenes, by other democratic countries, and it's been modeled by you folks in terms of the coalitions that you have been part of. So every moment of this conference, when I listen to the stories, when I hear the achievements, when I understand deeper the challenges, and I see us come together in good spirit, that is the source of optimism that this world needs more than anything. So to all of you, thank you.
Amen.
Great. I'm afraid that's all our time. Would you please give our panel another hand? Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.